a lot of schools are test optional schools now. The SAT and the ACT aren't as de rigueur as they used to be. And that makes the personal essay perhaps the most important, in fact, I think the most important element, single element, apart from perhaps your grades, in the application package. Even high scorers on those standardized tests now face stiff competition from students who don't submit test scores, but instead use a compelling personal essay to persuade schools to admit them. Even before the era of test optional, I've sat on several of these committees, and I think the personal essay for all of us was the most telling part of an application and the most potentially powerful element. So it's well worth your time and effort to make it as good as you can. And that's what we're here today to try and help you do. Two types of essays we'll be dealing with. The personal essay, also called the personal statement, we'll use those phrases interchangeably. And that's the Common App essay, as it's usually known, required by nearly all colleges. The same essay goes to all Common App schools, just like the same Common App goes to them all. Common App essay should match one of the 7 prompts. We'll look at a set of 7 from last year in a few minutes. But the essays all have in common an emphasis on personal growth. You're going to tell a growth story of some kind that's personal and unique to you. If a school doesn't use the Common App and you're applying to schools that do and that don't, you can still use basically the same essay. As you'll see, the topics that they give you, the questions that they pose as topics for the essays are general enough that almost anything can fit under at least one of them, if not all of them. And so you'll have it's not that hard to tweak the Common App essay in here and there to make it fit a question on an application that doesn't use the Common App, but wants an essay of its own. 250 to 650 word limit on the Common App. What we like to call the sweet spot is about 500. 500 and a bit maybe is about the length of the most successful essays. 250, which is 1 page, double space type, is too short, and 650 tends to be too long. There are exceptions, of course. If you're a very good writer or a very good storyteller, you can easily write 650 words to breeze right along. But in general, for most people, 500 and a bit is what you should aim for, around 500 words, comfortably in the middle of the range there. As for the supplemental essays, they vary widely from 30 to 400 word answers, depending on the school. Many of the top colleges require supplemental essays, the Ivy League schools, for example, and different essays are required for different prompts, of course. You should directly answer the application's prompts, which are written by the individual colleges, and the purpose of the essays is to gain insight into your character, your background, your thought process, what kind of student you'll make. The questions tend to be much more specific than the questions that prompt the personal essay. And they're after your favorite music or your favorite books or adjectives that you'd apply to yourself, things like that tell a more personal, introspective story. So those are the 2 types of essays. The short answer essay is just the short version of a supplemental essay. So we'll be using the same advice applies to both those categories. Now, for many of you, the personal essay may be the first time that you've been asked to write about yourself in an analytical way. instead of analyzing a literary work or historical event, you're going to be asked to demonstrate some kind of insight into your own personal growth, then ability to analyze your own character, your own development, and the factors that have influenced you for good or bad during your life, and that have contributed the most to your growth. So it's an introspective, analytic kind of perspective that you want to communicate, and use the essay to show that you can pull off. You use the essay to highlight important personal characteristics that your application can't convey. The rest of it only. So you're after a personal voice that has it's not slangy or too colloquial, but has a personal touch to it. Conversational is the best word I can think of to describe the kind of tone that you're shooting for. Not a formal academic tone, and not a slangy, colloquial tone either, but conversational, intelligent conversation is the kind of register that you want to hit. And you want to stay organized. That all clarity and cohesive organization are the best showcase for your analytical skills. So we'll be emphasizing a lot the importance of outlining your essay before you start writing anywhere near a final draft, and cohesive organization as giving a unity to your essay. It's all important. The thesis. Your personal statement should have a main idea about which every paragraph and sentence ultimately revolves. This is your essay's thesis. We're using thesis a little differently than we do when we're talking about an academic subject or a school essay. Think of a thesis as an answer to a how question: how I became, how I grew to love such and such, how I grew to love school, how I grew to respect or to have ambitions to be a lawyer or a judge. A thesis should answer a how question of that kind. At least that's a good kind of thesis to start with. So it's a story-based thesis. You're going to present a story or a set of examples from your life that are going to illustrate the thesis of how you became the person that you are, with the passions and characteristics that you have to offer the school as a prospective student. So your thesis should above all convey a growth story. You're in the middle of growth into adulthood right now, or perhaps towards the end of it. So there's a growth story there to tell, and your job is to find it and make it as interesting and compelling as you can. Growth here also we're using in a kind of restricted sense. It can mean improving as a person, overcoming obstacles, broadening your horizons, learning to respect others, and so on. All these can be answers to that how question. It's your thesis. How I overcame obstacles, how I broadened my horizons, how I learned to respect others, and so on. Growth does not mean success in school or sports. The rest of your application should be sufficient to tell that story. And your story should be about more than just the effort you put into winning a medal or getting an A+ or whatever, or how your team won the big game, one of the most popular and generally one of the dullest of personal essay topics. There are exceptions. There are good sports personal essays, but they tend to lapse into cliche, a lot of them, so that you've got to watch out for. Your self-analysis can include shortcomings, mistakes, or failures. This is very important because it's part of you're showcasing your analytic skills, your ability to look inside yourself and see what's there with a fair degree of objectivity, not just virtues and what a wonderful person you are, but analyzing your shortcomings, things you're working on, flaws in your character that you're working on, mistakes, failures that help you grow, things like that. They can make an essay not weaker, but stronger by acknowledging some of these things about yourself in the context of a growth story, that you're outgrowing them, that you're growing into a better person than you were in the past, or a more well-rounded person, or a person with broader horizons than you used to have. And of course, shortcomings and mistakes and failures in school are also relevant here, because we all learn a lot from those, whether we like to admit it or not. So a thesis equals a growth story of some kind. Brainstorming the thesis. So we've got to come up with something in our life that that makes for a compelling thesis, a compelling how question. It has a strong story behind it to illustrate it, or a strong set of examples. If your life has been strongly impacted by a major turning point or shaped by long-term adversity, telling this story in terms of personal growth can make for an effective thesis. For example, your father died when you were 10, and to help your mother, you had to take a part-time job or teach yourself things that your father would have taught you if he'd lived, like how to do home repairs, things like that. And this developed in you a strong sense of independence. So you became an independent thinker as well as an independent doer. And so your father's death turned out to be a positive influence on your life. That makes a good story. Or you grew up with a disabled sibling whose struggles gradually taught you the importance of patience and empathy. Maybe at the beginning, when you were younger, you got angry at him, you got impatient, you didn't have, you felt neglected by your parents because they had to spend so much time tending to your disabled sibling. You were jealous, you were envious, and so on. And all these things you struggle to overcome, or we're witnessing your sibling struggle, taught you gradually to develop patience and empathy, which today you have, and that you can apply to academic work, for example. So there's a story of how, two examples of how obstacles, one, a major turning point, a single event, and the other, a process over years and years, can both tell a positive story of how you grew into the person you are today, and that you are continuing to grow into, and that you plan to make college a major stepping stone in continuing and developing that growth. But not all of us have stories like that. A lot of us just live ordinary life from day to day, don't have much of a sense of our lives being very dramatic or earth-shaking. And so if you don't have a dramatic story to tell, one technique you can use is to draw up a list of everyday facts about yourself: hobbies, quirks, favorite books, and teachers, mentors, adults maybe who've had a strong positive influence on your life, friendships, best friendships, what the character, a character portrait of your best friend, and how, given who you are, it makes sense that he's your best friend or she's your best friend. And it'll turn out that your life turns out to be more interesting than you thought. I've dealt with a lot of students over the years who come in convinced that they have nothing to say about themselves and can't think of a single interesting thing. But a few well put questions can draw students out. And if you can do this to yourself, it's well worth trying, to make a list of these things and ask yourself, am I really so dull and ordinary as all that? And it'll turn out that you're not, and that you have lots of interesting things just to say and stories to tell. If you just focus on the little things and their larger significance. For example, you accidentally injured your brother in a hockey match and felt so sorry, you started to do nice things for him without telling anyone. And feeling good about this experience gradually developed into a sense that doing good in the world, maybe working for Oxfam or some NGO in a poor country or something like that, where you toil in obscurity, but doing good in the world is good for its own sake, not for wealth or prestige, or because you're going to become famous or whatever. You do it for its own sake, without telling anyone, so to speak. So there's a simple example of how an ordinary life incident that doesn't seem to have any special significance at all, and certainly no traumatic experience, still develops into a broad and meaningful lesson about the world in general and about yourself and your place in it. So there's lots of good stuff hidden in these ordinary life experiences that you'll be surprised at how interesting your life can be once you start thinking about it. A similar approach is the activities list. Extracurricular activities, work experiences, if you've had summer jobs or part-time jobs, and try writing a thesis, a how question, a how statement in connection with each one, and then write essay drafts based on the 2 or 3 strongest, and gradually get to develop a sense of which is your strongest 1 or 2 activities or experiences that you can tell the story of in your essay. Questions to bear in mind: what have you done to improve your school or community? What activity makes you feel most like yourself? What is the most responsibility you've ever had? That first one is particularly important. What have you done to improve your school or community? JFK once said, as we know, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. You should keep in mind a variation on that. Ask not what your college can do for you, ask what college can do for your country, ask what you can do for your college. A lot of students approach the application as all about them and what they want out of the school. The school, it would be great for me in this way and great for me in that way. That's why I want to come. But what makes an application stand out is when a student says, this is what I can bring to the student community. This is what I can bring to an academic department. A passion for the subject, an ambition that to pursue a graduate program at the college after your undergraduate work is done. Leadership roles in the campus community, and so on. What you have to offer, not just what the school has to offer you. Bear that in mind, because that's, and when you're reviewing your essay as a whole, once you've drafted a fairly final draft, ask yourself if you've addressed that issue, and whether you've made it clear that you have something to offer them, as well as thinking that they have something to offer you. Explaining a deficiency, another possible purpose of the essay, related to overcoming obstacles. There's an additional information section on the Common App where you can explain isolated failures, like here's the example of doing poorly on an AP physics exam because you didn't sleep the night before due to a family medical emergency. As long as you don't say the dog ate my homework or something like that, you can use the additional information section for things of that nature. However, if there's a more systemic issue involved, say you're applying to top schools with a B average, the personal essay is the place to address it. Make it part of your growth story, how you earned your B despite obstacles that might have defeated a less determined student. Throw the emphasis on your determination to against all odds and against the adversities of your circumstances, so that the B becomes an achievement, not just something to excuse or to apologize for. How you transformed yourself from a mediocre C student into a late blooming A, to give yourself that B average. So you can explain a deficiency in terms of overcoming obstacles, and if it's going to be obvious, like in this situation, if Harvard's looking at your application and it's the B average, you have to say something about that. So you turn it into your personal essay and make it a compelling personal story about how you overcame the obstacles that were in your way, or the rough start that you had for whatever reason. Perhaps your own attitude needed adjustment, and you gradually achieved that. So the B is an achievement then, and not just a blemish. And finally, the Supreme Court, as you know, has weighed in recently. John Roberts' majority opinion is worth quoting. This is the Supreme Court banning affirmative action as a basis for admission. Nothing in this opinion should be construed as prohibiting universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected his or her life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise. In other words, and everybody's trying to deal with this. The University of North Carolina just last week drafted a resolution trying to deal with this issue. Everybody's trying to figure out a way to make it the school's responsibility not to pay attention to race as a factor in admission, while at the same time allowing students to be free to talk about race if it's vital to their personal story in their personal essay. So in other words, the ban on race-based admissions doesn't mean that you have to steer clear of racial factors in your life. The personal essay is a place to be yourself. If race plays an essential role in your growth story and/or your sense of identity, then don't hesitate to write honestly about it. Don't try to game the system, and don't go out of your way to avoid the issue if it's central to your own life. There's of course the possibility that the committee will pretend that they're accepting you because your essay is so good, and yet the real reason is because you're Asian or Hispanic or Black or white or whatever. My advice is, if you feel you have to write about it, be honest about it, and don't worry about gaming the system or trying to avoid the subject altogether. Everybody wants to blame the schools, not the students. The students are, and working this out as a matter of academic policy is a tough go for everyone. It's complicated, but nobody wants to blame students for writing honestly about race if that's the subject of their personal essay. Okay. The common versus the uncommon app. We've already gone over some of this. The common app is accepted by umpteen US colleges. The common app gives 7 prompts a year, which we'll look at shortly. Supplemental essays and short answers are not found on the common app, but are unique to individual schools. The University of California is the most famous example. The whole system, all nine universities, I think there's 9, have their own application with different personal essay prompts. We'll look at a set of those too. When applying both to schools that use the common app and those that don't, look for prompts that fit your thesis. So the same essay, so you can send the same essay to all with some minor tweaking. The questions are going to be vague enough and general enough to allow you to do that. If you write your common app essay and then want to apply to UC Berkeley or wherever, look at Berkeley, look at UC's list of prompts, and you're bound to find one that your essay can be fit to with a few minor adjustments. So you're still, even when you're writing 2 different essays, or sending one to a common app school and one to an uncommon app school, you're still writing basically the same essay with just a few tweaks. And there's commonapp.org, which starting today, I believe, August 1st, you can access the Common App and get going on those essay prompts. Here we go. The prompts on last year's Common App. Let's look at the first one. Some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful to them, their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share, and so on. So there's a good example of how a how type thesis, how I became interested in such and such, how I discovered my talent for this, how I developed my talent for that, is tailor-made for that kind of thesis based essay. And then there's the obstacles topic, the number 2. The obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Tell about a challenge, a setback, or failure, and how it affected you. There's always a question like that, a topic like that about obstacles. You can rest assured that you'll find a prompt that your essay will fit, even if you write your essay independently of even looking at the prompts. Most of the time, once you turn to the prompts and look at the list of 7, you'll find that there's one that your essay can easily fit into. Number 5, discuss an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal crisis, maybe. It's blocked off. A new understanding of yourself or others. That's the dramatic turning point type of essay. And number 7, share an essay. Now look at this, share an essay on any topic of your choice. It can be one you've already written, or one to a different prompt, or one of your own design. So there's a prompt that's so general, it's not even a prompt. It's just whatever you've written, submit it. Now, I'd personally be wary of that unless you're a really strong creative writer and really good at writing and confident of that. It's better to tie your essay to the slightly less vague 1 through 6 and try to find the one that fits your essay the best. And if you have to tweak your essay a bit because you wrote the essay first, that's okay. But I'd stay away from 7 because it's kind of an invitation to be unfocused and too cliche-ridden. Pick a topic that has some substance to it. And then the California personal statement prompts are noticeably more specific, I'd say. Number 1, describe an example of your leadership experience in which you positively influenced or helped resolve disputes or contributed to group efforts over time. That's fairly specific. There's several factors there that all have to be satisfied by the story that you're telling in support of your thesis. So that's more substantial. If you're California bound, you can expect that from the list of prompts. Similarly, number 2, every person has a creative side, and it can be expressed in many ways, not just artistic, but all these other ways, innovative thinking and so on, problem solving. Describe how you express your creativity. So there again is a more specific and specifically analytical, self-analytical question that asks you to dig a little deeper into yourself and recognize and be able to discuss the sources of your creativity and what kind of creativity you have as an individual. Notice number 7, what have you done to make your school or your community a better place? We ran into that question as an example above. And again, that pertains to the goal of saying or conveying to your admissions committee what you have to offer the college in terms of making it a better place. What would you do extracurricularly or academically, or in some other way? Would your character and your personality and your enthusiasm and your energy, would it improve the campus life somehow for everyone else? You've got to think of ways in which that would be true. So those are worth considering and noticing that the California and supplemental essays in general tend to be a little more substantive and specific than the Common App topics. Now, organizing. There's 2 formats here that we've laid out. One is a standard traditional 5-paragraph format. For those of you who, well, for people who aren't too comfortable writing in the first place, or people who have an organized mind and like to lay things out in a traditionally organized way. Again, about 500 words is your sweet spot. Traditional 5-paragraph structure. First paragraph makes a strong, clear thesis statement. How I became, how I grew into, how I overcame, and so on. A first paragraph describes in brief and in summary how you managed to achieve the state of growth that you reached at this point in your life. Then paragraphs 2, 3, and 4, the middle 3 paragraphs, give either specific supporting examples, one example in each paragraph, or tell a supporting 3-stage story. You can support your thesis with a single story if it's a good story and it has a 3-stage structure that you could split into 3 paragraphs. Or you can discuss 3 specific supporting examples that are separate and represent separate stages of your growth. And then paragraph 5, you summarize your personal growth so far and look to further development in college and beyond. The and beyond is important. You want to convey a sense of college as a stage in your life that you have the vision to see beyond into the future, where you have ambitions and goals. Now these can be more or less genuine. Well, not genuine, but more or less true, let's say. Everybody allows that as you go through college in particular, you change, and your goals may change, and your ambitions may change, and so on. But the ability to show that you're thinking that way, you're thinking about your future, and as college as an integral part of an integral extension of your past and a prelude to your future, a kind of hinge your college life. That you can analyze what's going on before with your thesis, how I became, and beyond college, your career, what career you're shooting for, what field you want to enter, what you want to accomplish in life, and so on. So college and beyond is a phrase to keep in mind at the end of this tradition of this, well, both types of essays. The so-called open format is for the more creative type of writer. And this start by hooking the reader with an attention-grabbing anecdote or dramatic turning point in your life. So you start with a key incident, your father's death, your brother's injury, whatever it is, as a hook to get you to draw your reader into your story. And then your thesis emerges through a number of paragraphs, depending on your sense of how to organize the essay. It can be 3, it can be 4, it can be 2, it can be 5. It all depends. Your thesis emerges incrementally as you discuss the significance of that episode, that dramatic turning point for your life. So your thesis gradually emerges out of the story, rather than in the 5-paragraph format where you state your thesis up front and then use your examples and your supporting story to support it. Here, you're starting with a dramatic opening that hooks the reader in with drama, and then you're developing gradually a thesis out of that incident to show, so that the thesis only is clearly stated at the end. The final paragraph states your thesis clearly, summarizing your growth so far and your further development in college and beyond. I made a point of making the last bit the same, because the final paragraph serves the same purpose in both structures. It looks to college and beyond. It's future oriented, whereas the story itself of your growth is basically past oriented. So right at the end, you pivot towards your future and talk about that. Find a super theme. Supplemental essays and short answers. These are the kinds of things that you find on top college, so-called top colleges, Ivy Leagues, and so on. For which you want a super theme. What's a super theme? Well, you have a thesis in your personal essay. The super theme develops the thesis into a kind of overarching character portrait, self-portrait that you want to present to the college. And the supplemental essays and short answers are ways of adding color and detail to your self-portrait. So you want them all to hang together in a way so that you appear to be a coherent character, a whole person. And you want them to have color, and you want them to add something to your thesis, not just repeat your thesis, the thesis of your personal essay. You try to unite all the elements, the various essays and short answer questions, into an overarching super theme that enriches your personal statement's thesis by illustrating aspects of a consistent self-portrait. Think of it as answering questions like, what sort of person are you? What are your goals and values? What makes you a strong candidate for admission? Again, what have you got to offer? Well, what does a person like you have to offer a campus life that would make you the sort of person that we really want to have at our college? It makes us enthusiastic about recruiting you. Now, how do you find this super theme? Well, it's easier said than done, but one technique is to write down about a dozen adjectives that describe yourself, and then kind of shift them around on pieces of paper or whatever, group them in different ways until you find the group of 3 or 4 that best compose the self-portrait you want to convey, and then use the supplemental and short answer questions to illustrate aspects of that self-portrait that the personal essay didn't get to, or that lie outside the scope of the personal essay. So the thesis, excuse me. The thesis of your essay is one element in the super theme that you develop with your supplemental essays and short answers. Now, here's a sample of supplemental essay from Stanford. Briefly elaborate on one of your extracurricular activities or a job you hold or responsibilities you have for your family. Now, if your super theme is the effect of your father's death upon your life, let's say, and your personal essay's thesis was how you grew more independent, remember, we use that as an example, a sense of independence, an independent thinker, independent doer, self-initiator. You could use this supplemental essay to add that you also developed a sense of responsibility. You developed by taking a part-time job to help with family finances. So there's another throwing light on another aspect of the same super theme that your essay's thesis addressed, both based on the overarching impact of your father's death on your own life. Your essay stressed independence. Your supplemental essay stresses responsibility. They're closely related, of course, but they throw different shafts of light, different angles illuminate from different angles aspects of the personality that you and character that you've developed because of this traumatic event in your life. Short answers. Name your favorite book, film, music, or art pieces. Now, you don't want to respond to this kind of thing with a list of academic books and artsy films. Better a regular teen than a pretentious phony. You don't want to try too hard to come across as some sort of intellectual or some kind of something you're not. However, if you mix typical pop culture fare, your favorite hip hop records, whatever, with a timeless movie like The Wizard of Oz or a book on current affairs, or maybe some classic jazz, a mix like that can help you come across as both thoughtful and credible, because it's credible that someone in their late teens would drop a list like this. You don't want to seem to be trying to appear to be a heavy-duty scholar, because it strains credulity, as we say, to believe that. And again, try to tailor your answer so that it dovetails with your super theme. Pick books, films, music, whatever, so that they harmonize with the super theme that your thesis has set up in your personal essay. You want to throw a different light on different colors, add different colors to a consistent self-portrait, and give an overarching unity to all the written elements of your application. Now, how to write this thing? It's much easier to talk about writing than it is to write. Writing is hard. Writing is lonely. Even the best writers, the most prolific writers, do everything they can to try to avoid sitting down at their desk and actually writing. It's something that even if you love, it's very hard to buckle down to and do. Partly because it's what we call an iterative process in the opening of that opening bullet there. Iterative meaning over and over again. Writing, rewriting. It takes many cycles of brainstorming, drafting, and revising to develop a final draft. Imagine it's like producing a reality TV show where they film hours and hours of film and then boil it down to half an hour or an hour's worth of through editing. Writing is somewhat like that. You write draft after draft and page after page, only to have them all end up in the wastebasket, and the metaphorical wastebasket anyway. And you end up with 2 pages or 2.5 pages of good, gritty, concise stuff through a lot of hard work and a lot of cutting and editing. But a good way to start is to write freely. Your first draft can be any length you want. It can be much longer than 650 words. Just start writing. get an initial idea of what your thesis might be. It can be very rough, or just start writing until just by the act of writing, you can sometimes stumble on your thesis, your how I became question, just by starting to write about your life in general. Don't worry about organization. Don't worry about grammatical niceties or anything. Just write, and until you have a substantial body of writing from which you can then start cutting and trimming the fat, and cutting down the stuff that's no good, and leaving only the leanest parts of what you wrote. The core of what you wrote should be left at the end of that first editing process, when you first of all write freely and freewheeling, and then cut it down to edit it down to its essence. And then you can use that edited down essence as the basis for an organized outline. Doing an outline is perhaps the most important part of doing an essay, in my opinion. When you're writing an exam essay under time constraint, I always say it's not a mistake to spend at least a third of your time doing the outline, because you're going to write faster and you're going to write better if you're organized to start with, rather than improvising from first sentence to last. And after every sentence, you have to say, well, what am I going to say next? And you end up with a disorganized mess. You want an outline to guide yourself, and you want it to be based on the best of your free writing about yourself that you started with. So once you've got a hardcore of good writing about yourself after trimming the fat, and then you have your organized outline based on that, then you can write not a finished draft or final draft, but the first attempt at a final draft, keeping to the word limit, which you didn't worry about when you were writing freely, and keeping to your outline to stay organized. Your outline should say, should be divided into paragraphs, what the job of each paragraph is, what each paragraph is going to say, what story it's going to tell, or what example it's going to illustrate, and just outline your 5-part story, your 5-part essay, or your open format essay before you start writing. And then write a new draft with the outline as a guide. And finally, well, it's not finally, because you have to repeat this process, have parents and teachers critique your work, people you trust, an older sibling perhaps, who's already in college, or parents and teachers are always good, tutors as well, we should say. Revise, repeat, and remember. 90% of writing well is rewriting. It's like Woody Allen said, 80% and 90% of success is showing up. It's the same idea. Now, a couple of lists of things to avoid. Writing style. Don't try to appear to be someone you're not. Just be yourself. Yes, don't be pompous. Don't be overly academic. Don't be overly formal. Don't try to impress. Be conversational again. Don't use a lot of big words. Same idea. Keep it conversational, using dictionary words only when well chosen and necessary. Sometimes only a fancy vocab word will do to describe what we're trying to describe, particularly something about ourselves. So the occasional big word is okay, but you don't want to fill your essay with big words as if you're trying to show off. And only choose the dictionary word when it's necessary, when there's no adequate substitute. Don't be pretentious, same idea, using inflated or grandiose rhetoric. Now, on the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum, avoid slang. Be conversational, but don't be so conversational that you sound like you're talking on a street corner to your friends. And don't break grammatical rules as a rule, except for special effect, when it's clear you know you're breaking them. Don't break them inadvertently, obviously, but make sure that when you do break them deliberately, any reader would recognize immediately that this writer knows that the grammatical error, so-called, that he's indulging in for effect, and it should, if it is effective, it can be an occasional device. But in general, one thing your proofreaders are proofreading for would be that you're following grammatical rules. Don't plead, complain, or try to play on the reader's sympathies. It's one thing to write a story about how you overcame obstacles. It's another thing to complain about how the world is against you and everybody's out to get you and things like that. Avoid that kind of tone, like you're complaining about your lot in life. If you're overcoming obstacles, it's because you're strong and you're determined and you've got stick-to-itiveness. You're trying to draw something positive from the obstacles, not just complain about them, or get the reader to sympathize with you and think, oh, this poor student, we must let him in. That won't work. And then don't lie or exaggerate. Your readers are experts and can tell. Yeah, this is related to a similar point, that when students plagiarize, they almost always underestimate the ease with which a professional educator can tell when someone is plagiarizing. Same thing here. If you lie or exaggerate or are phony in any kind of way, your readers can sense that, and they'll pass your essay over without giving it too much of a thought. So much for style. Essay content, what to avoid. Above all, avoid vague generalities. Pack your essay with specifics and details. They're what will make your essay stand out and sing. They'll make it unique. If you're telling a story, load that story with specifics. Don't just generalize about aspects of your life and draw general morals or general conclusions or anything like that. You make sure that you're packing your examples and your stories with details, because that's what makes your essay unique. It makes it you. So yeah, it's similar with your thesis. How I became a good person is not only too self-congratulatory, but it's too vague to be a thesis. How I became good at some particular thing, that's different, that's specific. Avoid topics that everyone else would be writing about, like how hard it was to school during the COVID pandemic, or how our team won the big game, things like that. The COVID pandemic is, of course, a very worthy subject to think about, but it's probably still a situation where an awful lot of students will be writing essays with that as their thesis-related topic. So you want to avoid topics that you know are going to be very widely written about, and pick something that's ideally only you or almost only you can claim to be your story. Lots of people had COVID, but if you had a disabled sibling, that's a whole different ball game, and much more interesting story. Avoid expressing opinions on controversial topics that may antagonize your reader. Things like abortion. That's a political suggestion, in the sense that you don't want to antagonize a reader who disagrees with you on a controversial subject of public debate. I would stay away from those. Avoid stating well-known facts about a school, like its location, mascot, local weather, traditions. This is a way of showing off. You should show that you know a lot about the school. When they ask a question, as they often do, like why are you applying to this particular school? You should know something about a particular department or a particular professor or a particular that you want to work with, or a particular program that you want to be part of. If you're applying to Yale and your super theme is has to do with helping others, and you have strong science scores, and Yale, as we know, has a great neuroscience department. It makes sense that you really want to get into Yale because you want to be a neurosurgeon and help other people in that way. So that's reasoning like that shows that you know something about the school, and that there's some specific reason why you want to go there rather than Brown, let's say, or Harvard. Schools like to know that you know something about them, but not this standard stuff like mascots and gee, the weather's nice there and so on. Avoid factual errors. This is an obvious one. If you express interest in a school's program, like Yale's neuroscience program, don't confuse it with another program at another school, or misspell a professor's name and so on. Make sure that you've got your facts straight, and demonstrate that you know something about the school. You've taken the trouble to research it and to give some thought to which schools you're applying to, and you have good reason to apply to this one. It has the advantage also of being flattering to the school. Be passionate but clear and logical. That sounds contradictory, but it's not really. Being passionate is an important way to engage the reader, to have a passion for the subject you're writing about, and to show that your essay wasn't written by someone else or by a chatbot. Write with feeling, but in a mature voice. Find the most efficient and concise way to make your points. Clarity and cohesive organization are vital to any successful essay, whether it's an application essay or not. If your reader can't see a clear thesis in your essay, it'll be passed over. And a clear thesis and a logical structure. So organize, outline, be cohesive and clear, and yet at the same time communicate passion. It's easier said than done, but if you work hard enough and rewrite enough, you can do it. There's a slide here that we don't have time to get into for special schools. All the same rules apply, really. If it involves a portfolio of some kind, an art portfolio, let's say, make sure that's in sync with your super theme and your essay's thesis about yourself, and that you're a good fit for the lifestyle of the career that you're going for, as well as a qualified candidate. Today's August 1st, opening day for the Common App. Why not get started? Start writing that thesis, searching for freewheeling first draft that can go on, and try writing about yourself. If you've never done it before, it'll take some practice, some getting used to. So use your freewheeling first draft for that as well, and then start cutting and recutting and re-editing, if you're applying to a lot of schools with supplemental props, you need more time. So if you've got time this August with what's left of the summer, use it wisely, and you could hardly do better than using it to come up with an excellent personal essay. And our last slide there is a summary of the points we've made. Brainstorm your thesis and super theme, write long, then start cutting, show passion and hook the reader with a strong opening paragraph. Thesis too can be a hook, by the way. If your thesis in your 5-paragraph structure is strong enough, it can make a good hook of its own. Show passion and hook the reader with a strong opening paragraph, but overall your primary aims are clarity and cohesion. Avoid common pitfalls like hackneyed topics, pretentiousness, and slang. Be mindful to coordinate each written response with your super theme. Get your drafts proofread by adults and revise accordingly. And edit. Good writing is rewriting. It can't be repeated.